All right, welcome in everyone. Welcome to this week's Sports and Leisure History Look Back. It's time for us to look back in the week's history, and this is going to look back at the history we posted from April 27th to May 3rd. As always, I'm joined by my good friend and my partner, Clayton Hamilton. Clayton, what's up?
Not much, man. Just trying to get through all of the playoffs in hockey and in basketball and deal with a full slate of major league games. And I got the Giro d'Italia coming up on Saturday. We just finished up with women's beach volleyball national champions. So swamped.
Yeah, you got a full slate. Full slate. But before we get into the history, I wanted to ask you if you knew, because this has kind of flown under the radar, but we're actually living through history. And did you know that this is the first time ever in the history of MLB divisional teams, divisional play, that one division is every team is above 500, and that is your Reds and the NL Central.
And the Reds laid a big fat egg this weekend and got swept in Pittsburgh, and they have not been able to beat the Pirates over the past 6-7 years. They gave some stat. There's something like 26-48 since 2019, some ridiculous. I don't know if that number's absolutely correct, but that's what I kind of remember from them on the broadcast. Terrible.
Yeah, it's crazy. Just even say that about the Pirates. When the last time the Pirates were relevant and looking pretty good, and the Cubs right now, it's musical chairs in that division. But as of today, the Cubs are leading that division. The Cardinals that took 2-3 from my Dodgers, who are looking pretty good. They're 2 behind, and also the Reds are 2 behind, and then not far behind them at a game and a half each, behind, tied for the final 2 spots are the Brewers and the Pirates. So that whole division is looking pretty competitive. What do you think? You watch a lot more games live than I do. You think that it's going to last? Just someone's going to fade?
I would suspect that the Pirates and the Cardinals and the Reds will show up as the Pirates and the Cardinals and the Reds as they were meant to be this season, and that the Brewers and the Cubs, who are just sort of lying there in the weeds, by the end, should be a 2-horse race between the two of them. But it's been exciting to see at least Pittsburgh and Cincinnati playing well at the beginning of the year. And St. Louis has been so much better than I think anybody thought that they were going to be. And they've been competitive even in games that they've lost this year. And their bullpen and their pitching staff is really what's going to tell the tale for St. Louis.
Yeah, St. Louis, my pick for Rookie of the Year is J.J. Weatherholt. It's looking pretty good. Real solid player. I got to watch him. I follow him a lot. He's on my fantasy team, and so I've been kind of following his stats and so forth. Just kind of catching some highlights. But I watched him this weekend and playing the Dodgers, and man, he can do it on both sides of the ball. He made some amazing defensive plays, and he's just looks like a player that has been playing for 5, 6, 7 years. He just does not look like a rookie. Does not look rattled. He just looks like he knows what he's doing when he goes up to the plate. So he's been pretty impressive, and they have a lot of young players. But that's probably why what you said earlier, that they'll probably fade a little bit. Eventually those players struggle a little bit down the stretch.
Yeah, the Cardinals always remind me of the San Antonio Spurs. That you always get a collection of the same kind of players that grow up in a system learning how to do things fundamentally sound in the right way, and it's just the Cardinal way, the Spurs way. It just 2 class organizations that continually, punch above their weight.
Yeah, for sure. And then the Pirates, I just have a soft spot for them because they do have some really likable players, and it'd be nice to see that team get back to relevance because it's such a great fan base, such a great stadium out there, and they've been bad for a long time. So I'm hoping the Pirates, kind of rooting for them. Maybe I'll root for your Reds to come in first, and then maybe the Pirates get the wild card after them.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see. I get frustrated with the Pirates because the Reds can't ever beat them. But I loved Dave Parker when I was a kid. Yeah. Omar Moreno and Phil Garner and Kent Tekulve and those yellow tops with yellow bottom uniforms and the yellow hat. And Pittsburgh, great place to see a game. So while I loathe the Steelers and the Penguins, I do not mind the Pirates being good.
Yeah. There's always that stat that I hear when talking about Dodger Stadium with Willie Stargell hitting that monster home run at a Dodger Stadium. I think it still ranks as one of the, if not the longest home run ever hit at Dodger Stadium. It's definitely up there in the top three. I don't get mad about that. I don't have any ill will towards the Pirates. They've had some big games over the history of many years with the Dodgers going back. Obviously not recently. And I think the Cardinals growing up, I don't know if you know, I think you know this. I was a big Cardinals fan in the 80s when I was first getting into baseball and loved Vince Coleman. I loved all the speed. I loved all the defense that they had. So I got a soft spot for some of those NL Central teams.
Yeah, I loved Whitey Ball when he had Vince Coleman and Willie McGee and Tommy Herr, and they would all steal 80-something plus bases, and Darryl Porter behind the plate. They were fun. Big Jack Clark, George Hendrick.
I think that just kind of formed my baseball appreciation, because even now I love stolen bases and defense. It probably has a lot to do with what I watched growing up. So also basketball in full swing. I know you've been catching a lot of games. We could probably do a whole show on basketball, but some surprises, some kind of shocks?
I was shocked and amazed that Cleveland came back and beat the Raptors. The way that game started, it fed into every fear and every childhood trauma that I've ever had watching Cleveland play any sport. The very first possession was a missed dunk, and then they turned the ball over twice and gave up 2 layups and an and one, and it was 5-0 before they had even figured out what was going on. But what a great third quarter where so many NBA games are won, and Jared Allen and Evan Mobley finally played like the bigs they were meant to be. And very much looking forward to see if Cleveland can pull it together in a really wide open East. We saw Detroit play the way that they had played all season, and it's nice to see that their good season was rewarded. But what a shocker that the Celtics are gone after no one expected anything of them. And I think there's a lot of temptation to say what a failed season it is for Boston, but Boston was never even projected to make the playoffs this year, and then they do and lose Jason Tatum last night, and I think that really hurt them. A lot of those series have been going much longer than people expected, and even in the Western Conference too. It just seems like there's a lot teams. I don't know if it's struggling to put other teams away, or teams are a lot better and a lot more evenly matched than maybe we've seen in past seasons. But yeah, I'm with you. The shocker with the Celtics. I think there's a whole, panic in Boston now with how the Red Sox have fallen apart early in the baseball season, it'll be interesting to see next round sort of who takes the reins in the East. Yeah, the East wide open, but the great question will be, can anybody beat Oklahoma City?
Yeah. All right, well, let's move on to our history. And I want to kick it off with Steve Busby and the 1973 Royals, because we posted about them on April 27th. And there was history made. It was the 5th year of existence for the Kansas City Royals franchise. Steve Busby, which is not really a name that will jump out at anyone unless you're a diehard Royals fan. He tossed the first no-hitter in Royals franchise history. What do you remember about that Royals team and sort of that era of Kansas City baseball?
Well, firstly, I mostly remember Steve Busby as a commentator for the Texas Rangers. That's really where I know Steve Busby from, not so much from his playing days. He was pretty much done by the time I was old enough to know what was going on. But those Royal teams were really good in the 70s, really competitive, and they gave the Yankees all sorts of trouble in the playoffs all throughout the 70s. But Steve Busby's an interesting cat because he's so much better than I think he'd sort of ever gotten credit for. And he was appreciated a little bit at the time. He was a 2-time All-Star. But I think if you look back at him now, you should appreciate Steve Busby even more than he was probably appreciated when he was playing.
Yeah, he threw a lot of innings early in his career. Actually, for about 3 seasons, from 73 to 75. I kind of looked up the numbers. He was 6th in MLB for total innings thrown. And so he's on the list with people like Wilbur Wood, Nolan Ryan, Jim Palmer, Phil Niekro, Gaylord Perry, and then Steve Busby. So, I think it's interesting because it just shows you how now if a pitcher's throwing a lot of innings and is getting over 200 is a really big deal, right, in MLB right now. That stands out on itself. But back then, while he did throw a lot for even for his era, it wasn't like he's remarkable because he could throw a lot of innings. Just some pitchers just threw a lot of innings, right?
Yeah, and you think about if he was coming out in the draft. This is a guy that's coming off winning the College World Series at USC. He throws a complete game in his major league debut as a September call-up. And then he goes into his next season. He throws 238 innings because it gets a no-hitter. Has a second no-hitter later in his career. And I feel really, really bad for Steve Busby because this guy, Jeff, that pitched all these innings, went 70 and 54 with a 3.72 ERA, which any team would be dying to have this guy right now. He never made more than $41,000 in his career. And you think about what would this guy be worth now if he were a free agent or getting ready to go into his arbitration at 23-24 with 18-win season, a 22-win season.
Yeah, and someone who can put up a lot of quality innings, right? Not just a workhorse, but a workhorse who puts up a ton of innings. You probably see teams trying to lock him up early. But I also think there's the kind of the flip side of this era versus that era because he's also known for something else historically. Dr. Frank Jobe in 1976 performed rotator cuff surgery on him, and it was sort of the first of its kind. Everyone knows about Tommy John. That's a popular surgery, but rotator cuff surgery was also something that sort of emerged right around this time. And you have to wonder if the workload and the innings on his arm most likely led to that shoulder injury. And he's unfortunately for not great reasons, he's in the history books or in the medical history books. But I think that it's really a sign of the times and the era because now you have innings that are managed, and I think a lot of people who are in favor of that would point to Steve Busby and say you don't want to have what happened to Steve Busby happen to some of our really good young pitchers because maybe he would have a much longer, more successful career. After 1970, he didn't pitch in 1977 because of the surgery, and he only pitched for a few more years, and he didn't throw more than 100 innings in any of the seasons after that, and he was done by 1980.
Yeah, but one of the things that you have to think about with that surgery is, one, if you're pitching now, he would have had the surgery right away.
Yeah. That's true.
He was told by the medical people, fight through the pain, pitch through it. We don't really know how to fix it. There wasn't, when he needed the surgery, there was no rotator cuff surgery.
Right.
Until a year later, after he had already done even more damage to his shoulder. So I think if he had the medical treatment that they have today, he would have bounced back and we would still be talking about Steve Busby.
Yeah, and he'd probably have a different recovery regimen and a way to, kind of work him back. And maybe he starts out with, gradual innings increase over the next season or two after he does the surgery and back to full strength, 2 or 3 years later. So you're right. I think that just sort of different era, different medical knowledge and so forth.
Yeah, I just feel bad for him because, like I said, $41,000 a year. Yeah. He's very comparable for his beginning of his career, even though he throws more innings. He doesn't have as many strikeouts, but to a guy like Walker Buehler. Mm-hmm. And Walker Buehler made $4 million, $4 million, $8 million, $8 million, and then $21 million. Or, Pablo Lopez, who got that 4-year, $73.5 million deal. Yeah. And Busby, poor Busby, better than both of them, $41,000. Tough.
I think so many of these old timers that are all grouchy and grumpy, like Goose Gossage is so angry, and I think I always think some of them look back and seeing what guys are making now and what they made back then, and they're just like bitter that they played in the wrong era where you just have to like show up and you're getting millions of dollars minimum. You just show up, right? And that's it.
Yeah, and what the sad part is like you're going to pay Walker Buehler $21 million. You're going to pay Steve Busby $41,000. And granted, inflation, $41,000 is worth about $280,000 now,
Right.
which is still well under league minimum. But the problem that I have with Walker Buehler making $21 million is that I got to pay $120 to watch him pitch, and I got to pay $46 to park the car, and I got to pay $30 to eat. I could watch Steve Busby for $11 and a $1.50 hot dog and $6 to park the car. And Steve Busby's going to give me a better game than Walker Buehler.
Well, also depends where you're going to watch, right? Because you also go watch Paul Skeens and pay a lot less than you're paying to see Walker Buehler or a lot of these teams, So regional. And going back to him playing in Kansas City, maybe be a little more reasonable out there, but he's one of those guys, and maybe because of the region he played in, and he kind of flew under the radar. What would he be like if he played in New York or played in some of the big market teams where those young seasons would be a lot more heralded than they were because he was in Kansas City.
Yeah, and I would also tell you that I would eat barbecue in Kansas City 100% of the time more than I would eat it in San Diego. So I'm going to see Busby all day long.
Unless they have a Phil's barbecue in the stadium in San Diego, but I went to a game in Kansas City, and they had Gates Barbecue, famous barbecue out there in Kansas City. I know it's, for those listening in Kansas City, I realize it's probably not the best, but it's still pretty good damn barbecue in Kansas City.
Yeah, but give me Steve Busby, man. You know what? It was funny about all those innings. There were only 3 guys last year threw over 200 innings.
Oh, yeah.
And that was Logan Webb, 207, Garrett Crochet, 205, and Christopher Sanchez at 202.
Yeah, and there's so much, it's such a weird coincidence because I was listening to the Dodger-Cardinals game today, and Oral Hershiser was talking about how there's a move in baseball now to move starting pitchers away from max effort to maybe a little bit more precision pitching. And I always think things are so cyclical in baseball, right? Because it was max effort, and now it's moving back because Robleski, who pitched for the Dodgers today, didn't actually have a strikeout in a game, and he pitched pretty deep into the game. I mean, how often do you see that in a current game? And he pitched well. He was sharp. His control was good, and he put a lot of balls in play, but it was soft contact, and he pitched really well. So yeah, it's interesting to see if that trend continues, where we start moving back towards someone like Busby, his strikeout to walk ratio was 2-to-1. He had 6 strikeouts for every 3 walks, or he had 6 strikeouts per 9 innings, 3 walks per 9 innings over the course of his career. So it'd be interesting to see the direction baseball goes.
Yeah, when you put him up against sort of other guys that were similar or where he is, a guy like Garrett Crochet or Logan Webb or Christopher Sanchez, those guys, they all have more strikeouts. They all have a better strikeout to walk ratio than he did, but he's pretty close to him when you start looking at wins and at ERA, and he certainly is giving you more innings. And he's going to be comparable or better than guys like Brady Singer or Cal Quantrill.
Oh, yeah.
Both of which, are making so much money. Cal Quantrill, $18 million through 4 years, Jeff. Cal Quantrill, $18 million. Steve Busby, $41,000.
Yeah, but it's all relative because look how much more money baseball's bringing in.
I know, but man. Yeah. Oh, I can't get over it. And like I said, it really says, well, what are we paying these guys for?
Right.
What is it's $18 million because that's the way it is. But should we pay $18 million? Should we just say no? Cal Quantrill, you do not deserve $18 million over 4 years. You don't. You haven't. What have you done, Cal Quantrill, to justify? How can I, as an owner, tell my fan base that they've got to pay $50 to park their car so they can watch your sorry ass walk people at $18 million? Like, at what point is it enough?
Right. Yeah, I mean, and it's all based on So a lot of it is based on the revenue that MLB is bringing in. So I think that's the bigger question, right? Is people are paying more money, and there's more money flowing through the system for maybe arguably a worse product. And it's just the nature of sports franchises and sports leagues in general. I don't think this is just a baseball thing, because you look at how much basketball players are making now in all these different sports leagues, and there's money out there. The money is coming from somewhere, then a lot more than it used to. So that ecosystem is sort of growing, and the players want a piece of that. Speaking of your little rant there on what am I paying players for kind of reminded me of our next history topic. I'm not going to say you're like Charles Comiskey, because you're a kinder, softer person than I think Charles Comiskey was. But we did have a post about his White Sox. It was actually more about the team playing his White Sox, because in 1901, on April 28th, Smiling Bock Baker, as he was called, playing for the Cleveland Blues, had one of the worst pitching outings of any pitcher in history. So definitely not a Steve Busby. What happened was he gave up a record 23 singles in a loss to Comiskey's White Sox. They lost. The Cleveland team lost 13-1. But the weird catch with that game, and a lot of people will look for that game and maybe say, well, I don't see it as an official game. What happened was Comiskey oversold the stadium by 3,000. And instead of refunding the fans, because Comiskey, one thing he was consistent is he did not like giving money out or giving money away or giving money back. He made a deal with the umps where the fans could be on the field. So 3,000 fans on the field, and if a ball was hit into the crowd, it would automatically be a single. So that's what contributed to the 23 singles given up that day. Never see that in modern times. It was 1901. Baseball was still very new. Owners had a lot of control over what happened at the stadium. So all that aside, unfortunately, history's not kind to Baker. But I read this story and it totally blew my mind to think, you never see something like that, right?
No. One would have hoped you would never see that again. But yeah, man, poor Charlie Bock Baker, man, because the article from the papers in Chicago said that there were many routine fly balls that would have been outs that were all singles.
Yeah.
And here's a guy who's like, you get one shot at your career. He had one shot. He only played one more game in his career. He got released after this game because they got beat so badly. And he's given up fly balls for outs that are singles because Charles Comiskey is a miser and he's greedy and he oversells and he won't refund anybody's money, and he wants everybody to write about him, about how great and benevolent he was because he gave the fans an experience of being on the field, and people are talking about the White Sox, and that's all that matters. And poor Charlie Bock Baker's out of baseball because his fly balls are singles. Charles Comiskey, the same guy that made his own team wash their own uniforms.
I wanted to mention, look, I don't want to defend Charlie Comiskey because he was a jerk. He was, a tightwad, as some have written about in the media. He was all kinds of negative things, but he's also featured in the movie 8 Men Out. And they portray him as this sort of villainous person, and while he wasn't a great person, he was probably on par with a lot of the owners of the day. And I think the sort of the legend of who he was, the villain of Charlie Comiskey, probably exceeded who he really was, right? And so he was a tightwad. He underpaid Shoeless Joe Jackson. He underpaid Eddie Cicotte, which is famous in 8 Men Out, where supposedly in the movie he doesn't want to play Eddie Cicotte because he doesn't want to pay the bonus, and Eddie Cicotte's about to get to 30 wins. Apparently that wasn't true. That was just kind of a legend that grew out of just how terrible Charlie Comiskey was, and probably the fact that the players had to do things like wash their own uniforms, and he cut their laundry money. They were known to have the filthiest uniforms in baseball. It's interesting, it's just these little things that Comiskey did just shows how they can sort of build up to someone's character, and it makes him into even more of a villain than he already is. So,
I bet you, though, that he ate at good restaurants, and I bet you he had nice cigars, and I bet you he had nice suits, even if his team was, wearing dirty socks. He reminds me of it. It's funny that you had mentioned about him not wanting to pay, because your Pittsburgh Pirates that you're so fond of 10 minutes ago, their owner, Bob Nutting, did the same thing to Rowdy Tellez a couple of years ago, and Rowdy Tellez is 4 plate appearances away from getting a $200,000 bonus, and they released him, DFA'd him.
Yeah.
Third leading RBI guy, and they DFA'd him with a week left when he needed 4 at-bats.
Well, to be fair, not defending that kind of behavior, whether it occurred with Comiskey or in the modern era. But I do think that it's interesting that he kind of built this sort of infamous sort of legend about himself being just not wanting to pay players. There's there's a famous story about how he would promise his players, if you win the pennant, give you all a bonus, and the bonus turned out to be cheap champagne. So, a lot of stories about Charlie Comiskey, someone who's, sort of, if you talk to White Sox fans, they kind of cringe over, not to mention he was, not the most kind-hearted soul. He definitely had a lot of racial biases, to put it mildly. But I don't know how much different he was really with owners in that era, because you just hear a lot of these stories from a lot of owners, but for whatever reason they kind of stuck with Charlie Comiskey, and maybe because of the urban legends that evolved around movies like 8 Men Out, that's probably something that sort of grew with his legacy.
Yeah. But I don't really necessarily see a whole lot of difference between Charlie Comiskey and owners now.
Yeah.
They're just as awful. If you look at somebody like Mark Cuban, Mark Cuban's a terrible human being, right? He's a terrible human being. And the sad part is Mark Cuban was one of us. He was a fan. He was one of us. And then he grew up and he became a billionaire, and now he acts like one. And if you want to find somebody on this planet who knows so very little about so very much, it's Mark Cuban, and he's just like Charlie Comiskey. And it's terrible. It's terrible the way that these owners treat the people that have given them everything that they have. And they always say, well, it's a business. It's a business. It's a business, right? But how much is enough? That's the thing. How much is enough? Mm-hmm. How much of these billions of dollars that you're generating and you're wringing out of the people that have supported your product, how much is enough?
Yeah. No, I agree. And, it's like, you made $1 billion, you made $2 billion, you made $3 billion. Do you need to really do more because you need to add $2 more billion onto your already existing billions? I'm with you. How much is really enough? And it's the one thing we've learned about billionaires is the only thing they really like more than money is more money.
Yeah, it's just a game. It's just a game for them. It's like Mark Cuban's got 2.3 billion. I had to get 2.4 because it's a game. It's sports for the rich.
Yeah.
Is how many billions do you have? But you think about guys like Daniel Snyder. Forget about the toxic work environment, all of that nonsense. Here's the guy that started charging his fans to tailgate at the game. They had to get a tailgating permit from him. He started charging for people to go to summer practice. Summer practice training camp used to be free. He's like, oh no, we're going to charge $20 and we're going to charge to park. Look at spring training. Spring training used to be some place to go because it was cheap and it was fun. You get access to the players and it was great. And now, I don't know the last time you were at spring training, but the tickets are $60, $70, $25, $30 to park the car. It's not a value anymore. And you're going to see the guys that are on the major league team for 3-4 innings, 2 at bats, 1 at bat. It's not a value anymore. You're not providing anything of value anymore in spring training like it used to be. So I haven't gone to spring training in years because there's no value in it.
Yeah, it's become one of those things that it becomes trendy because a lot of people now are able to, with how accessible information is and how easy it is to follow sort of minor league guys and up and coming superstars. So it's become popular because people want to get out and see those up and coming stars. But I'm with you. It should be an experience where you're getting value out of it. You're getting to see some of these guys who aren't major league players, and it's a more casual environment, more laid back. I mean, on top of everything else, and you can't really blame MLB for this because it's just supply and demand, but when you add in the ticket prices and traveling and all of that, and then the hotels out there have gotten crazy expensive unless you're staying an hour out of the city. It's like everything else. It's just everything. Once they've realized how they can market something and make money off of something, they're willing to jump in and just crank up that, those fees and those amounts.
And ultimately what they're going to do is you're going to price out in the next generation.
Mm-hmm. Right.
They're going to find something else to do because the entry point, you've priced out the entry point.
Yeah. Well, speaking of rich people, I want to move on to Babe Ruth. It's one of the most famous cheapskate stories probably in baseball history, which was when owner Harry Frazee sold Babe Ruth to the Yankees. And on May 1st, 1920, which is what we posted about, Babe Ruth hit his first of 659 home runs out of 714 of his career, but he had 659 with the Yankees. His first came, like I said, on May 1st, 1920. It was about 5 months after he was sold by Harry Frazee from the Red Sox to the Yankees. That deal was finalized in December, in the offseason, so it's December 1919. Biggest moment in sort of baseball history, singular moment or transactional moment? What do you think?
I absolutely think that set in motion a chain of events for 75 to 100 years of baseball history. What's the world look like if Babe Ruth stays a Red Sox?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things that come to mind. One is the Red Sox probably keep him as a pitcher, focus on pitching, which once he moved over to the Yankees, he didn't pitch much anymore, and you could see his offensive numbers really exploded after that. And two, that's really the start of the Yankees-Red Sox rivalry, because the Yankees didn't really have much of a rivalry, didn't really have much of a team. They hadn't won a World Series. And contrast against the Red Sox, who had won 5 World Series up to that point, and then hadn't. And then we know the big drought that came once they got rid of Babe Ruth. So a really interesting pivotal moment in baseball history. Like I said, probably the biggest transactional moment ever, if not biggest singular moment in baseball history.
Yeah, if you think from that trade up until 2000, it was 26 world championships for the Yankees in 80 years. That's unreal.
What's crazy, and I think, not sure everyone really thinks about it this way, but the biggest team in New York at that time, baseball-wise, was the New York Giants. They had won a couple World Series going back to really towards the end of the 19th century, but in 1905 they also won a World Series, but they were had a little bit more of a talent pool or a legacy than the Yankees did up to that point, because really we're talking about the Highlanders, and they weren't really even the Yankees.
Yeah, you sort of think about the baseball begins and ends in New York City with the Yankees, but they started in Baltimore, and then they went to New York, and they were the Highlanders, and before they became the Yankees. But I kind of look back at it and think like how wonderful it is that this deal happened. And I know that the folks at Boston, I get it. Like if I'm a Red Sox fan, I'm like, this is terrible and screw me, right? For saying it. But I think it worked out really well because having the Yankees be the greatest team that baseball has seen over or franchise over the course of a period, I think it works really well with them being in New York as opposed to being in Boston. And why I say that is because Boston has the Celtics and they have the Patriots. And if they had the Red Sox too, I just think it's kind of too much. It's nice that things are spread out, that the Yankees are the best franchise in baseball, and that the Lakers and the Celtics are the best when it comes to basketball. And then you've got the Patriots, and then a little bit of old school, you go the 49ers and Cowboys and the Packers. And then in hockey, you get the Canadiens. And so it's sort of spread out instead of all concentrated into one spot, which I think is really kind of on some way works in Boston's favor, because I don't think there's as much hatred towards Boston as there would be if they had 3 of the 4 sports.
Well, I'm still, as a Dodger fan, I'm still kind of bitter at the Red Sox, so I will not say screw you, Clayton. I will be okay. But yeah, and I think for sort of Babe Ruth showed what a star could do in New York, right? He became a huge, really global star. There's some great stories about him going to Japan and representing Major League Baseball, and he's, everyone knows Babe Ruth, even if you're not a baseball fan, right? That just shows how big of a star he was, because the Babe, that's something that someone who's the least. If you ask anyone, even someone who's never watched a day of baseball, who do you associate with baseball? It's Babe Ruth. So, and I think he made $70,000 to $80,000 a year with bonuses while he was in New York, and during that era, right? That's a huge amount of money going back to the 20s and the 30s. So huge for him, huge for stars, really creating that sort of that mecca that New York became. It's sort of the center of the sports world, at least in the first half of the 20th century. And that's really important in the history of kind of sports media and really the sports landscape. And then shortly after that, right, you have, Madison Square Garden and basketball, and a lot of it grew out from there. But really it was baseball was sort of that table setter for a huge sports climate and sports environment. We have fans who are kind of bitter at New York sports media, have the saying East Coast bias, and that really all goes back to New York, right? Because that was the center of everything, and there's a reason why the Yankees won all those championships, because they attracted so much talent, because everyone wanted to be in New York, and then they had the money to attract all those players because it was so, it was such it was really a Wild West in terms of baseball and free agency and getting talent, much more than it is now, where there's the CBA and it's a lot more regulated and there's rules. So I think it's just an interesting, really pivotal moment, not just for the Yankees, not just for baseball, but really in the sports world.
And you said it right there. He made $40,000 to $50,000 a year more than Steve Busby.
That's right.
50 years ahead of Steve Busby, who's still, to me, the most underpaid Major League Baseball player that I know about. But Babe Ruth, yeah, he did transcend. And for all the people that are Babe Ruth haters, there are surprisingly a lot of them that say he's fat and he's slow and he couldn't play, and all they think about is 1936, 37 Babe Ruth, and the way that the old film makes it look like he runs, and the way that the puffy uniforms made him look that he was super fat. But where we're talking about this Babe Ruth at this period in time, he was 6'2", 215.
Yeah.
Right? So that's not fact. Pete Alonso is 6'3", 245. Right? And you're going to say that Pete Alonso's fat. You know who else is 6'2", 215? Nolan Arenado.
Wow.
Right? Nolan Arenado.
Wow.
So enough with the, he's the fat old man that can't swing the bat.
Yeah.
He had a 342 average.
No,
and in our hyper crazy recency biased world now, remember, he's doing things we've only seen Shohei Ohtani do.
Right.
He's that great. And he's 690 slugging, 1164 OPS. These are still records.
Yeah, I actually have. It's funny because those uniforms are not flattering. The floppy kind of loose uniforms that they wore. I think that contributes probably to what people's impressions are, and also the sort of the filming and the like choppiness of the old footage. But I saw some pictures with him, and people should go Google this or look this up. There's some old pictures of him without his shirt on from back then, and he's pretty ripped. Like, he's in shape. He's not, like you said, this kind of like dumpy or kind of overweight mess. Yeah, and maybe later in his career, that's what people think about. But that's pretty much every player as you get older in your career, unless you happen to be doing some PEDs that are helping you stay fit and firm. But yeah, I think people. Are there a lot of Babe Ruth haters?
I think there are, because there's the tremendous amount of people who's like, oh, well, you can't take his numbers seriously because baseball wasn't integrated yet. And then there's only a short amount of teams, and so they saw the same pitchers over and over again. And so you just have to discount him that he's just a fat old man and he could never play today. And there's a lot of that. There's a tremendous amount of that. But when you look at his OPS plus, Jeff, and I know you're a numbers dude, right? So his OPS plus is a record for a career. It's 206, right? 206. Yeah. So he's 106% better than the average player. Right. The next closest guy is Teddy Williams, 191. And then Barry Bonds, 182, Lou Gehrig, 179. And for another guy who gets a ton of hate that says he's completely overrated, even though he does play in the integrated era and he does play in modern baseball and he does face 100 miles an hour and he does face a new reliever every time, the next guy on the list, Aaron Judge, 178. Yeah. And so for all these numbers, guys, they're going, well, Aaron Judge, he doesn't help you win. He's garbage. He can't hit. He just, He's 178. He's only behind Lou Gehrig, Barry Bonds, Ted Williams, and Babe Ruth.
And Ted Williams was such a specimen that they had to freeze his head.
Yeah, they did. And you also think about Ted Williams, too, and the amount of productive years that he lost in the war.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, his numbers are eye-popping and amazing. And I think we talk about this a lot. It's really hard to rate eras because you can make sort of these what-if arguments for so many different facets of the game. And, if Babe Ruth had the same training that players have now and the same diet that players have now and the nutritional knowledge that players have now, right? Like, what would his numbers be even better, right? And he's probably a lot of those players are smoking in the dugout and drinking and staying out all night and all of that. So I think it's just, again, just hard. Errors are so difficult, especially in baseball, because things have changed so much. I mean, I'm sure every sport has those big sort of changes, but baseball especially has gone through such a big cultural difference in the sport, not necessarily in society, but what players' expectations are and how they approach the game, so radically different that yeah, and you're right. You do, it is helpful when you could see the same pictures multiple times in a season, a lot more probably in Babe Ruth's era than they do now. So there's pros and cons, give and take there.
Yeah, and I really like what you did with this week, because this week is a whole bunch of what ifs.
Yeah.
It's what if with Steve Busby. It's what if with Bock Baker. It's what if Babe Ruth had been a Red Sox. It's what if Derrick Rose had not gotten hurt.
Yeah, so Derrick Rose is the next one we're going to talk about. And on May 3rd in 2011, it was announced that Derrick Rose, who's a Bulls point guard, at age 22 became the youngest MVP ever in the history of the sport. He beat out Wes Unseld, who was 23 when he got his MVP in 1969, playing for the Baltimore Bullets. But, man, right out of the gate, Derrick Rose looked like he was just going to be a generational talent, and then, of course, the injuries set in. But how good was Derrick Rose when he first came on the scene?
I feel it if Derrick Rose, an unhurt Derrick Rose, would be a top 10 NBA player of all time.
Yeah, I think so.
If he had not had those 4 knee surgeries and problems that he had so early on, that just took away everything that made him special. Mm-hmm. He was an ISO point guard who would facilitate. He could find his own shot. He could create his own shot. He could go around you. He could go over you. And his jump shot, which was probably the worst thing that he did, was getting progressively better before he got hurt.
Yeah, and I think people have to remember, too, he was a one-and-done guy, right? He went to Memphis and then played 1 year there and then went to the NBA. So he didn't even really form a lot of those fundamentals in college, and he really just sort of did his time in college and then went right into the NBA draft.
Yeah, he was fantastic, and he was I feel like he's one of the last of the playground players that all these guys that are in the Derrick Rose situation, and he came from a really rough part of Chicago, and he played in at Murray Park, which is as tough as it gets. And he said, there were no fouls, and I learned how to play through contact, and I learned how to create a shot and how to get around, people that meant you harm. And those players now are all playing AAU. They're all in gyms. They're all being taken away from the playground, and they're put in gyms with top-notch equipment and top-notch coaching, and they're being sent to private academies. And I feel like he's probably the last one that we've seen in a long time of the pure playground street player. And man, is that so much more fun to watch.
Yeah, that's a great point that you bring up about just sort of his roots and where he came from and where he learned to play. Because you're right, it's such a manicured environment now where if you have talent, they want to, and that's great. It's great for those guys who are able to get that assistance and that help and really further their career. But there's a lot of skill and talent that you gain from that playground style, and you're probably right. It probably contributed to his toughness. So, do you think Derrick Rose is a Hall of Famer?
I would love to see him be a Hall of Famer because he's so likable as a human being, and he was such a good player for such a short period of time. But objectively, I don't think he is a Hall of Famer, but I do think he will get in.
Right, because if he didn't get in, he'd be the only MVP. Every other MVP in the past who was eligible for the Hall of Fame has gotten in to the Basketball Hall of Fame. Has he done enough to maybe outside of the NBA court? He's got a gold medal with Team USA. He's got some other accolades. A lot of that they add to the resume, unlike baseball, where it's really just what you've done on the baseball field. But for the Naismith Hall of Fame, they sort of take into account some of these other attributes.
Yeah, he had a national championship finals appearance. In his 1 year, he did make it all the way to the final. They lost to Kansas. His thing that's really going to be is he was explosive, and he was a highlight reel, and he did a whole lot of things right, and was really exciting and was carrying a Bulls team. But as you look a little deeper in the numbers and as to what he was doing, I just don't see it as much as I want to, that he's a Hall of Fame player, because even his MVP year, there are pros and cons in his MVP year. One of the things that is overlooked is that they had the best record in the East that year. They had the best record in the NBA. And that was really hard to achieve because he lost Carlos Boozer and Joakim Noah, his two best players, for the majority of the year. Carlos Boozer only played 59 games and Joakim Noah only played 48. And yet they still had 62 wins and the best record in basketball. But on the other side, when you look at the pure numbers and the analytics, which a lot of guys like to do, it was very clear that he was the best player on the best team, not necessarily the best player. The basketball version of WAR, he was at a 16.6. LeBron James was 21.2 and Dwight Howard was 20.5. So both of them had significantly statistically more impactful years that year, but he still won the MVP because he was the best player on the best team. And even when you take a look at him and his contemporaries at what he does well as a pure scorer, is he a better pure scorer than Kevin Durant or Carmelo Anthony? No. Is he able to get to the basket easier than LeBron James or Dwayne Wade? No. Mm-mm. Is he a better offensive all-around player than Kobe Bryant or Dirk Nowitzki? No. And so when you start looking at it that way and the short amount of time, and now you're looking at a guy that's 17.4, 5, and 5, he just doesn't get there. As much as I want him to get there, and as much as I feel like he is a phenomenal human being and a phenomenal basketball player, at the end of the day, he's Grant Hill or Penny Hardaway. That just the injuries got him.
Yeah, I worry about. I mean, it's a great accomplishment to win an MVP at such a young age, but I also wonder if that hurts him because the rest of his resume after that, because he had his peak essentially right at what it appears on the stat sheet. We can only go by what the numbers he put, right? So his best years are his first 3 or 4 seasons.
Yeah, his first 3 years up until the injury.
Yeah, he won Rookie of the Year, and then he got his MVP in his 3rd season, and then after that, it was all the injuries, and so that's what people remember, right? And that's what they'll look back and say, yeah, the track record isn't there. He didn't do enough. Since those first 3 years. And so I think it hurts him a little bit because it was so early in his career, whereas if he had sort of some up and down years, won the MVP maybe, 5th, 6th, 7th year, and then had some injuries after that, then I think maybe he gets a little bit more of a look for that. But I'm with you. I would love for him to get in. I just worry about the injuries or take away too much from his legacy.
Because even with somebody else who had injury problems and an MVP in Bill Walton did have 2 championships, which is something that Derrick Rose does not have, even though they were both injury-riddled.
Yeah. So, I mentioned that he played for Memphis, and just interestingly enough, coincidentally, we talked about another Memphis team, not the college team, the Memphis Grizzlies. And so I wanted to also move on to where we posted on April 29th in 2011, where the Grizzlies became the only the second number 8 to beat a number 1 in the first round of the NBA playoffs. And they beat the San Antonio Spurs. They'd eventually lose in the next round in 7 games to the Warriors. But what do you remember about
Oklahoma
that?
City.
Oklahoma City. Sorry. Thank you for the correction. What do you remember about that Warriors team? I mean, unlike they didn't have a super standout like Derrick Rose had, and like on the Bulls with Derrick Rose, but they had some talent that was spread out.
They did have talent, the Grizzlies, that year, and that was the start of the Grindhouse. Yeah. Remember the Grindhouse? That was like a 8-year period of Memphis. It was after they had come over from Vancouver. They had really a little bit struggled to find their identity in Memphis, and they finally did with this stretch of really gutty, defensive-oriented, slow-paced basketball. And I've always, when it comes to the NBA, have been more of a player and group fan, and it's throughout my life it's been different teams at different times that I've really resonated with. I never had a hometown basketball team, and this Grindhouse Memphis team was one of my favorite teams for a 3-4 year period, and it was because of the way they just decided that they were going to make defense important.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest catalysts for that was getting Zach Randolph. And Zach Randolph had been pretty serviceable as a member of the Portland Trailblazers, and then he was on the Clippers, and they made a deal to get Zach Randolph. And Zach Randolph really sort of was the first guy to create that identity, and really one of the great trades of all time, because they got Zach Randolph for Quentin Richardson. Straight up. And that's a great trade if you're Memphis. Not so much if you're the Clippers. Great trade if you're Memphis.
It was a little kind of
one-sided.
Hurts my heart a little here.
But I love Zach Randolph, and I like the way that he played with Mark Gasol, and they had a whole inside presence. And when they got Tony Allen, like it was perfect. The problem that they ran into is they just couldn't shoot well enough from 3-point range. And if they got down 15, 20 points, which we see in the NBA now all the time, 15, 20 points is nothing now. That's a 3-minute run. They couldn't come back because they just didn't have enough scoring, because their only perimeter guy was Mike Conley Jr. And Mike Conley Jr. wasn't the Mike Conley Jr. that we know now, who became later in his career. He was a one and done as well. 1 year at Ohio State, went to the national championship game. They lost, went straight into the NBA. So he still had a tremendous amount of development to do, and that was happening during this time. But boy, they were a fun group.
Yeah, Mike Conley in terms of his defense, and Marc Gasol. And then I think this team, I think they established that slow pace, very physical pace, where even high scoring teams, that they could slow them down and really drag them down into the rocks and really slug it out with them. But you're right, they didn't have enough on the offensive side to really sort of kind of keep up with those high scoring teams. And then they had the team in the 2012-2013 season that was a little bit better, made a little bit deeper run. And I think the defense was even better. But they also were facing some teams that were slightly better as a unit defensively as well, right? You had the era with the Kevin Garnett and the Celtics. You had the Pacers with Hibbert, Paul George. So the defense was there, not enough offense, and I don't know if the defense was really enough, considering they're also facing some strong defensive teams as well.
Yeah, they had a little bit of a right place, right time with this Spurs team. They were aging a little bit. It was the year before Kawhi joined the Spurs. They would run into the Spurs again in 2013 in that Western Conference Final.
That's right.
They had some little bit of trouble. They had trouble with Oklahoma City this year and the next year. In the playoffs, they had that 27-point collapse against the Clippers. And they ended up losing the series. But it's funny because the big thing that they had trouble with was offense, and they kept trading and getting rid of their offensive guys to get better at defense. And one of the things that really helped that is when they traded away Rudy Gay, and he was part of that 3-team deal with Toronto and Detroit. And they got rid of Rudy Gay, who was really their best offensive player, and they brought in Tayshaun Prince from Detroit that really helped their defense even more than it already was. And then they got rid of O.J. Mayo. They let him walk in free agency because they decided that Tony Allen was their guy. And Tony Allen's going to be a bucket and a half less offensively, but what he gave them defensively was so much more. And they would use Tony Allen, and the forgotten man of all of this was Darrell Arthur, the forward out of Kansas. And he was 20 minutes a night, 9 points, 4 rebounds, but that was the type of guy that they had, and it just never panned out for them, because by the time they got beat by the Spurs, then the next year it was the Warriors, and it was Clay, and it was Steph, and the whole world of basketball changed, and they got really far left behind, and they've been paying for it ever since. They haven't been relevant in years.
Yeah. I guess the answer to the question is, can you ever have too much defense? And actually, maybe you can have too much.
Maybe you can, yeah. Maybe you can, because they can't win if they got to score 95 points or above. If they got to get to 110, can't do it.
It's. I want to move on. There's a couple other topics I want to go over, but I just wanted to mention, you'd never see this type of team constructed now, right? Where it's just offense is just a secondary consideration. It's all defense, and even while I think there's been a lack of focus on defense, teams are trying to address that. But it felt like it went a little too far.
Well, especially when you think about that trade that they made when they had Rudy Gay, and they were the 18th slowest team at that point, and they had the 7th best defense. When they trade Rudy Gay and they bring in Tayshaun Prince, they went to the slowest team, and they went to the 2nd best defense.
Yeah.
So, and it still didn't work.
Well, I want to move to soccer, not something that we've talked about very much.
Speaking of not being able to score and defense, there you go.
Well, but actually the New York Metro Stars in their final year before they became the Red Bull, they had Amado Guevara, and he was a bit of a scoring machine. He had a hat trick on April 30th, 2005. And it was their first win of the season, and it snapped a Colorado Rapids 12 match streak. But this was really a team that sort of didn't have a great identity in the world of soccer. Kind of been a middling team, and then they get new ownership, and they're changed into the Red Bulls and rebranded and a new approach. And it's been a pretty successful team as far as the Red Bulls go, right?
Yeah, that's been a really positive move for them in sort of changing their names. And we've seen a couple times before teams that have changed. We saw the Charlotte Hornets become the New Orleans Pelicans. But it's odd when a team doesn't move and they just change their name. That happened with the Bobcats and the Hornets after the Hornets were free again. But yeah, the New York and New Jersey Metro Stars, which I think from a branding and marketing standpoint is too much. It's really, really inclusive of the area, but sometimes you can have too many ingredients.
Yeah.
And that it wasn't the nice thing of let's throw everything in it and we end up with jambalaya, which is fantastic. It was let's throw everything in it and we end up with fruitcake, and that's not great. And the move to Red Bull was really a good thing for them. But I really feel like they missed the mark by not being the Cosmos to begin with, because the Cosmos had such a relevance and a name recognition in the New York metro area that they really probably could have capitalized on that familiarity. And, Pele was there, and it probably could have helped the New York, New Jersey Metro Stars when they first started out if they had just bitten the bullet and said, you know what, I know we don't want to have any of these old names. We want to make a break and start something new. But the Cosmos was the one exception.
It's interesting. I couldn't help think, AEG were the owners of the Metro Stars. And it is a lot to say the New York, New Jersey Metro Stars, so much so that I just left New Jersey out of my original statement about them. It's too many words. Red Bulls works out better. And it reminded me of when Fox owned the Dodgers, where it's this sort of faceless corporate approach to running a sports team that they're going to try to emphasize this corporate culture and how they're running the team rather than having... And I know ownership is totally different now than back in the day when you had these individual owners who were really personally invested and committed to their team. But it feels that AEG is almost too big of a corporation to kind of run a sports team. And I find that does sometimes it doesn't work that well.
Yeah, it's really odd because they ended up being the Metro Stars because John Klug, who was one of their principal owners, owned Metro Media. And so he named them after his company, and then they oddly get named after Red Bull after that. But the thing that's odd with Red Bull is that Red Bull is involved in a number of other sports now. So if you go to F1,
right,
like there's F1 Red Bull, and then Red Bull sponsors a number of extreme sports and winter sports. You'll have guys with Red Bull helmets that are skiers or lugers or whatnot, all the way down. Even your guy, Wout van Aert, for Team Visma, the cycling, he wears a Red Bull helmet, and he's individually sponsored. Even though Red Bull doesn't sponsor the cycling team, they sponsor him personally, and he's got a Red Bull helmet. So Red Bull, this was the beginning of that Red Bull creation of putting them and injecting them into sports in a way that we'd really only seen in NASCAR and IndyCar, not even so much F1, up until this point of now having a branding with a company and a sports team.
And then there's also the Flugtag, the Red Bull Flugtag, which is a fantastic event to go have fun at and watch live. If anyone out there is looking for something fun to do, the Flugtag is going to be in your area. Highly recommend going and spending the day outside by the water and watching it. But I think sometimes it's the personnel you put in place and kind of how you value those decision makers. Because I'm sure AEG had every intent in winning, and obviously winning just helps your brand, right? So I'm sure they meant to win, but I think it's the corporate culture and the approach that a lot of these companies take, where you're are you really tapping the right people to run your team? And it sounds like Red Bull has a little more track record, a little more success doing that with some of their other sort of ventures into the sports world.
They were also smart to Americanize it for an American audience.
Yeah,
because that's one of the things that soccer misses the boat a lot of times, is that soccer tries to force Americans to be the rest of the world. And it doesn't always work for us to be the rest of the world. And they had originally conceived it, they were Red Bull New York. And Red Bull New York doesn't sound, that's not how we talk. It's not how we talk. Red Bull New York is not how we talk, right? So they then changed and became New York Red Bulls. Now they sound like New York Yankees.
Right.
That's something that we're familiar with, and that was something that really helped their branding to not have it sound dumb, as Red Bull New York does. New York Red Bulls sounds like a team. Okay, the Red Bulls. All right.
Yeah.
Good. They're like the Blue Jays. I get it. Red Bulls. Yeah.
Before we conclude, I wanted to just talk about the Kentucky Derby. Because we had that this past weekend. Did you watch? History
I did.
Made. Some pretty exciting day of racing, right?
Yeah. It was really great. Sherry DeVoe, she became the first woman trainer to win the Kentucky Derby. She was the second woman to win a Triple Crown race. Jenna Andrea Antonocci won in the Belmont in 2023. And yeah, huge day for her. Huge day for those connections. And it was a pretty big upset in terms of the tote board. I don't know if you saw the Exacta, $1 Exacta got you 95 grand.
Yeah.
So pretty good day if you had the if you had the Superfecta. Sorry, not the Exacta, Superfecta.
Yeah, the payouts were really nice for those who were lucky enough to sort of get their money in on that. I one thing I was thinking about with this, and I was watching the race. I don't watch horse racing all that much. I think you follow it a little closer than me. I just try to catch the big events. I was curious about something, because there was a lot of talk about Japanese horse racing and really making a venture into sort of this world of horse racing. And I talked about maybe over the last 5 years or so, it's become a really big sport in Japan. Maybe a lot of people don't really understand. Maybe they heard that and didn't really understand what that was all about. Do you know much about the background on the Japanese horse racing?
Well, they've really gotten into breeding recently and trying to get as good a horses as they can from around the world, and then they breed them and run them in Japan now and come out, because there's just a ton of money there. And Fushaisi Pegasus, I don't remember if you remember that horse from 10, 12 years ago. That was a Kentucky Derby horse. Was really sort of one of the leaders in this experiment of let's get horses that are bred in Kentucky and in California and Florida, and then let's take them to Japan and do all of our breeding over there. And we can have more of a hands-on in terms of the raising of the horses. And they've been really successful. It's turned into a really great breeding ground in terms of running in a lot of times in the Middle East in Dubai and they run in Australia a lot, and then they'll bring their horses over here. And I think it's only going to get bigger because as horse racing gets more and more and more expensive, you're going to need more and more and more millionaires and more billionaires, and that's where they're coming from, is Japan.
I was watching it and with Mila. For those who don't know, that's my daughter. She's 12, and I was trying to get her. She's trying to show her different sports that I watch, and said, "Oh, do you want to watch the horse racing?" While you're doing, she was drawing or something, and I said, "Oh, these are Japanese horses." And I said, and I pulled out all the dad jokes and said, "They don't look Japanese; they just look like horses." She didn't laugh, and then I said, "And they don't speak Japanese; they just speak horse." And I got the look of, Dad, it's not a funny dad joke.
Yeah, no.
but anyway,
I'm with her on that one.
It was, she is learning Japanese, so I thought it would kind of spark an interest. But, I wanted to go to the history post, about the Kentucky Derby, and on May 2nd in 1942, Shutout, a horse named Shutout, made racing history. Won the Kentucky Derby, the only time it won the Kentucky Derby. And actually the biggest news around that was that famed Hall of Fame jockey, probably one of the greatest jockeys of all time, Eddie Arcaro, actually chose not to ride Shutout, even though he was offered the opportunity. He actually rode Devil Diver, just stablemate. And he said it was his biggest regret of his professional career not riding Shutout, because by doing so he would have moved into first place of the all-time wins for the Kentucky Derby. He's currently tied with Bill Hartack at 5 Kentucky Derby wins. So interesting history from the Kentucky Derby 1942, more for what didn't happen than what did.
Yeah, and if he would have won on Shutout that day, he would have had not just 6 Derbies, but also 6 Preakness and 6 Belmont. And one of those Belmonts was on that horse, Shutout, who he got back on and rode in the Belmont that year. Right. So he did end up getting back. But it's always funny that there's a lot of this jockey movement over the course of Derby week, because the same top riders are riding a number of these contenders as they get whittled down and qualify for Derby day, and they have to make a choice. And that really changes who everybody else gets. And just this year, just look at this year, it's funny because Tyler Gaffalione was supposed to ride Fulford, and that horse scratched. So as soon as that scratched, he didn't have a mount anymore, and his trainer said, "No, I want you to ride Ocelli, so you're going to ride Ocelli." And, poor Joseph Ramos was set to ride Ocelli, gets fired. He's kicked off. And Tyler Gaffalione gets on Ocelli, and Ocelli comes in third. And fortunes change just that fast, based on the owner and the relationships that they have with a particular jockey. But a really big run there from Shutout. He was in third coming down the stretch, past 2 other horses, With Regard and Valdina Orphan, in order to get the win. And you know what's really really neat about this horse Shutout, and kind of sad, a little sad, given everything that we've talked about today?
What's that?
Well, Shutout, that's what Steve Busby threw when he threw a no-hitter, and he made $41,000 that year. And this horse that won the Kentucky Derby won $65,000, more than Busby. He got a horse 50 years earlier. Makes more money than Steve Busby.
I was going to do a callback also, because you know how much Eddie Arcaro won over his career from the 1930s to 1962?
More than Steve Busby.
He did make way more than Steve Busby. $30 million over his career, which during that time, that's a huge amount of money. Especially people always think of the major sports leagues as where all the money's at, but horse racing those jockeys make a lot of money.
You know what's sad though? He made less than Walker Buehler. That's what's sad. And you're Carrier, Hall of Fame jockey, one of the greatest of all time, most successful, and he's made less. He's made less in his career than Walker Bueller's already made.
All right, we're gonna wrap it up there. All right, thanks Clayton always for joining me. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. If you want to learn more about our history, follow us. Go to our Facebook page at Sports and Leisure. Follow us at Substack at Sports and Leisure. Check us out on YouTube at Sports and Leisure. Comment, like, share, because the only thing we love more than talking about sports is sharing the sports and sharing the knowledge. So, spread it to the world, everyone, and we'll catch you next week.
Yeah, we'll catch you next week. Yeah, send us all your Steve Busby memories in the comments.
Absolutely. All right, thanks a lot. I'll see you next week.